Recently I've been wondering, with all of this international collaboration that is going on, we do have an astronaut currently on Salyut, how I'm going to get my crew over to different parts of the world at the drop of a hat. And of course the answer is going to come in a supersonic airliner, Concorde. Hello everyone and welcome back to For All Kerbalkind, and we're going to kick off this episode with Pyramus VIII on the 3rd of November 1967. This is going to be the third attempt at attempting or trying to soft land a probe on the surface of the moon. You may recall in the last episode, which unfortunately did come out a few months ago now, we had a bit of a break over the Christmas period and now we are going to be back. But yes, the last episode I managed to land on the surface of Mars. We have landed on Mars before we have landed on the moon, and that seems a little bit wonky to me. It seems like we've done things a bit backwards, but actually landing on Mars is somewhat easier due to the fact that Mars has an atmosphere, and the moon, obviously, we need to completely self-propel ourselves down to soft land on the surface of the moon, which is hopefully what will happen in this flight today. This is going to be on an Ariane 1, or Ariane 1 with 2 boosters on the side. I spent a very long time basically configuring the launch vehicle for this mission because I didn't want it to be too big. I really don't want to be using those boosters on the Ariane 1 constantly, but it just seems to be the way that things are going at the moment due to the fact that everything that I'm launching into space needs that massive booster configuration. If I were to just have the core stage on its own, there is no way that we could achieve this mission. And even with those 2 side boosters, well, I mean, the delta V margins for this mission are incredibly tight. I was able to get to orbit though, and we have plotted out a 3,130 meters per second burn over to the moon, which we have now begun. Using the RZ-20, the British Hydrolox engine for this stage, it's a bit of a lengthy burn because it does have very awful thrust, but my word, it's efficient. And you can see we have got ourselves a nice encounter with the moon. And now all I'm doing is using the RCS on that final stage, well, on the stage that has that Hydrolox engine, in order to fine-tune our approach to the moon so that we end up going straight to it. We're going for an impact here. I basically don't have the resources really at the moment to do this kind of in a way where I would get an orbit around the moon, then I would descend from an orbit of the moon. No, we're going for a direct landing because it tends to be a lot cheaper in terms of delta V to do this than it would be if, say, I wanted to get a nice orbit and then pick my landing site. You know, this is something that will probably happen in the future once we get a bit more capable, once we have a bigger launch pad, which is something that I am actually working on at the moment. Now, unfortunately, doing things this way means that you can't really pick your landing site, and that does sometimes mean that the Earth is just going to disappear over the horizon like it is now. And, well, we do manage to connect to our transfer stage very briefly, and we still have some connection to the Earth. But unfortunately, that ends up going smacking into the moon, and just like that, we have no communication back to Earth, and this has more than enough delta V to land, but I can't control it. I can't tell the engines to fire again, so once again, our moon landing is going to be a failure. And, well, yeah, not just that, but the game crashed, so we didn't even get to see an explosion. So really, that mission went about as badly as it could have done, because at least with an explosion we get some fireworks to see, but no. Kerbal Space Program is a perfectly balanced. No, it just broke. Which is annoying, but we're going to turn to Soyuz 15, which is currently docked to Salyut, because Peter de Kerman? Yeah, it's Peter de Kerman on here. Well, we unlocked the next iteration of the astronaut complex, which meant that we could do an EVA. And the main reason I have done this is not for the contract, it's just to farm a little bit more science. Now, I don't have jetpacks unlocked. I don't have the RCS jetpack unlocked. So unfortunately, Peter couldn't do much more than hang onto the side. And I like to think that Estrella and Roos inside were basically playing a little bit of a practical joke on him. He was told, like, oh, guys, we need to look at the outside hatch. There's something wrong with it. And Peter was very, very quick to respond and be like, yes, no, I'll go out. I don't have an RCS pack, but I'll go out. And Roos and Estrella, being the incredible comedians that they are, decided to lock him out afterwards. And he was stuck there for all of 5 minutes. And I mean, he was stuck there for 5 minutes because I wanted to gain the science, but it's my headcanon that those two were playing a little bit of a practical joke on our amazing British astronaut. But yeah, so that's what happened there. And now we are going to be attempting to return Soyuz back to Earth. And this is something that I have done before. I have flown a Soyuz mission a long time ago, and now we're doing it again. Last time, which was a long time ago, well, I forgot to fire the retro rockets, and it was a bit of a bumpy landing. But this time, I did make sure that I had all of the action groups where they should be, and as we are coming down in the North Sea, they fire up and the three are safely returned home. Fantastic. And that means we can come back to the Space Center and get ready to launch our next two missions. We're going to be launching these two a day after each other. So to begin with, we have Fish 4 on the 4th of December 1967. Now, the reason why I'm launching these so close is because the second mission, which is going to be Sparrow II, our second ever attempt at sending a crew to space on a European or British launch vehicle, well, that's got a very important contract that I want to complete, and that contract is going to be the first rendezvous. So what I'm going to be doing with Fish 4, which is just another generic communication satellite, this time plastered with even more solar panels because the last one died, well, we're going to put this into a very nice orbit that makes it very easy for Jeffrey de Kerman to rendezvous with it a day later. Now, the spacecraft that I have that is going to be attempting the rendezvous, it cannot stay in orbit for longer than 18 hours. This may be a little bit tight, so I want to try and make sure that I have as much room as possible to get an encounter within that 18 hours. And now we are going to, of course, turn to Sparrow II, which, as I mentioned, is launched a day later on the 5th of December. Jeffrey de Kerman is going to be our brave Kerbal on board this mission today. He has a lot of experience under his belt. He flew an electric lightning to space quite a long time ago. And if you haven't seen it, I am going to mention Beardy yesterday released a meme video of all of the For All Kerbalkind memes. I'd highly recommend going and checking it out. And it has made me realize that maybe I need to be doing more with the space lightning, because that did feature quite prominently, and it's definitely something that I might want to look at again. I know there have been jokes, there have been talks, there have been discussions about trying to send an electric lightning to the moon. It would be quite funny if that was my first lunar lander. I don't think that is going to be the case. I probably will go for a more realistic, more normal route. It's reminding me of that, is it the Babadook meme, where it's just the woman screaming at the child in the back of her car, being like, why can't you be normal? Yes, why can't my space agency be normal? We've done some pretty weird things up to this point in the save, I will say. And I know one thing that I did plan on doing was actually just using space planes for pretty much all of my crewed ventures. Unfortunately, if I would have wanted to go down that route, it would have meant that I'd have got into orbit a lot later than I did last year. Well, last episode even. It was actually this year in game. It was 1967 that we first got a Kerbal. I think it was Mary Kerman in the last episode, Up to Space. by ourselves. And yeah, if I would have gone for a space plane, it would have taken a little bit longer. But anyway, Sparrow II, we are launching this on a Black Prince 2, which is the upgraded version of the Black Prince rocket, the rocket that has been really the staple of the UK Space Agency over the course of this series. The upgrades to this are pretty nice. It does have 2 of those RZ-20 engines on its second stage, rather than using the Gamma 2, which was what initially was the Black Prince. It was kind of some weird amalgamation between the Blue Streak rocket and also a Black Arrow. It was very British design, haphazardly thrown together in the most Kerbal way possible. But we did make it to orbit with Jeffrey Decouplers. He is fine, he is here. And now we are performing our burn to rendezvous with the Fish satellite. I did manage to get it to a point where I would be able to meet with it with time left to spare for Jeffrey to do a couple of orbits and not really have to worry about him running out of electric charge whilst performing this mission. Now, one really painful thing about this rendezvous is, well, it wasn't the most efficient, so you can see I am now moving about 160 meters per second faster than my target, which is really not a great speed. I probably could have done this better if I had a little bit more time to play with, a little bit more electric charge, and I didn't have to worry about Jeffrey frying in the capsule. And yeah, so the speeds were a little bit high, but another problem is the engine on this Viking capsule is so pathetically weak that it took about 6 minutes to slow down so that I was going at a decent relative velocity to the target spacecraft that we were trying to rendezvous with. And now bringing up the first rendezvous contract, I can see that I have to be within 100 meters and going slower than 0.5 meters per second. And being 50 meters away now and only going 1 meters per second, well, that's something that we can definitely easily achieve. And there we go, we have completed that contract parameter, and we get a lovely shot of the sunrise as these 2 spacecraft fly right next to each other. I really like the new design of this Fish satellite, and that's something that I'm going to be incorporating a lot more. That being basically plastering the satellite with as many solar panels as possible. In the last episode, the Fish satellite that we launched at the end, unfortunately, was not going to be able to retain its electric charge for longer than a day. With this new design, it will last for a lot longer than a day. I mean, solar panel degradation is a thing and it will eventually die, but it's going to last a lot longer than a single day, which is great because it means that we have a new communication satellite up in Earth. But now what we are going to, Earth orbit even, now what we are doing is returning Jeffrey back home. And you can't really tell from this, but we are flying over the northern coast of Australia at the moment, which means we are very close to where we took off originally, which is fantastic. We don't have to worry about having to ask the Soviets or the US for our astronauts back. And actually, there will be another nation coming soon that we have to avoid at all costs. Well, no, maybe not avoid. But anyway, we landed safely. And with that, we performed the first rendezvous, which is a pivotal step in making sure that we are able to basically get 2 spacecraft up into orbit and make them meet, which is a fantastic thing to do because that leads to things like space stations. And space stations is something that I am actually rushing along the tech tree at the moment. I am really keen on unlocking docking ports, and the main reason for this is, well, I'm going to talk a little bit about this whilst we start flying Concorde. The main reason for this is because I really want to do some international collaboration. An international space station would be something fantastic to see, but that will have to wait for a future episode because that is going to be a long ways off in the future due to the fact that I am researching docking ports quite quickly, but they're still going to be quite some way off. Anyway, I mentioned at the very beginning of this episode that we are going to want to ferry our crew around the Earth very quickly without going to space, and what better way of doing that than designing a supersonic airliner? And of course, this is Concorde. Everyone knows it. It's the plane, the supersonic jet airliner that went faster than Mach 2 and made, I think, the trip from London to New York in about 3 to 4 hours. I would have to fact check that. I've not got any sort of script up on my screen at the moment. This is just me completely talking out of my head. And it is a bit unfortunate because I would have liked this to have been the first supersonic airliner in the series. We were beaten to the punchline. I don't know, beaten to the post by the Soviets, though. They stole our designs for this, and they came up with the Tupolev Tu-244. I want to say it is what that version of that aircraft was. I'm fairly sure it was. Once again, I really should have notes up on screen whilst I am doing this to figure out exactly what's gone on and what's happened. But anyway, talking about them stealing it, they actually did steal it. I sent my craft file over to Beardy, and he did make some modifications to it to make it a little bit more his own, but the base craft file that he did use for that plane was this Concorde. Well, actually, I say this Concorde, this is a complete redesign, so the Soviets stole from us, and we were like, no, we're going to work on it again. We need something new and fresh, and basically I redesigned it because reasons. I didn't like how the intakes looked on the original version, so I basically decided, yeah, we need to do that again. Anyway, this flight, what we are doing, and this took a really long time in game, we are going to be flying from Kourou all the way over to Wallops, because like I said, international collaboration and basically ferrying crew around is the main reason why I wanted to design or have Concorde as a vessel that I'm going to use. And I'm basically going to show that it can be done. We can fly from Kourou to Wallops in less than 3 hours, I think it took overall to fly this mission. And yes, this has massively sped up this footage, because who wants to watch an entire 3-hour flight of really not a lot going on? And it's not just sped up in editing, I'm also flying this at 4 times time warp, which means that the afterburners of the Concorde are looking a little bit weird because they use real plume rather than waterfall, and if you use physical time warp with old real plume configs, it does make the plumes look very weird like they are. Yeah, it's a beautiful plane. I'm really quite proud of how this design turned out. I did spend a lot of time on it, nowhere near as much time as N9 spends on his planes, and I do know he has been working on a hypersonic crew transport, which is very exciting to see. I actually have the save file, the craft file of that vessel in my game, because I was helping him test it out a little bit. He is so adverse to using atmospheric autopilot, and I basically said, look, come on, I reckon this will fly perfectly with atmospheric autopilot, and he was making all of these tiny little minute tweaks and flying it again and again and again and again and again, and as soon as he sent me the craft file and I flew it with AA on, it flew perfectly, but he's just loath to use that mod. He likes using trim. He loves a bit of trim. So, and yes, I was like, man, you could make things so much easier for yourself. And atmospheric autopilot is also great for just long flights like this, because, to be honest, I barely had any input over the course of this flight. Like, I did need to have it up on my screen the entire time, and I was constantly checking. But it was a lot nicer, and I'm fairly sure I was actually just sat coding on my laptop whilst I was doing this, getting a bit of practice in, and you can see there, we have made it all the way over to Wallops. I think it's Wallops, this one. I know N9 flies from Brownsville and Wallops. I'm fairly sure this is Wallops, Virginia, that we have gone to. I did try to go to Brownsville, because I'm fairly sure that's N9's primary launch site. However, the range just was too far. It was 5,500 kilometers to Wallops from Kourou. No, from Kourou to Brownsville, and it's about 4,500 from Kourou to Wallops. And you can see we have got barely any fuel left at this point. Now, this was a problem because me and N9 play on different textures, or we did when he built up Wallops. It was underground, so I had to quickly open up Kerbal constructs to try and find the runway. Now, because the runway that N9 uses when he flies from here is actually part of the Kerbal Space Center, there was no runway, so I had to very quickly go into Kerbal constructs and plop down a runway where the runway should have been. So N9 can be very thankful for me. I have built him a runway. He still owes me 0.4 funds, but I have gone and built him an entire runway at one of his launch sites. And I can't imagine that I'm ever going to be using that runway ever again, but I thought, well, we need to land Concorde somewhere flat. If I tried to land this on the ground, well, one, it wouldn't look that good and it'd be a bit rubbish, and two, there is a good chance that we would hit some bumps and the plane would meet an untimely demise, and Mary Kerman and Douglas Kerman would not be very happy with me, that is, if they were still alive. We are coming to our final moments of this flight now, and I was going a little bit slow, and we performed very much a Ryanair landing. We stopped very quickly because I was only going about 80 meters per second when I hit the runway. However, we almost lost the engines, we almost lost the back of the plane. I imagine if people were on this flight, they would have been screaming in terror. It was that bad, and actually something that I did, because this flight did take me about 2 hours in real life to film, was I was a bit aggressive with the turning at the end. Now, as we approach into a new year on the 1st of January, our fish satellites, which definitely don't have any cameras attached to them, have noticed some new activity over in China. A new player has joined for all Kerbalkind, Calvin Maclure, playing as the Liberated People Space Program of Communist Chinese People's Liberated People of China for Chinese Space Communist Liberated Peoples, or the LPSPCCPLPCCSCLP for short. Yes, Calvin will be joining as China, and you can expect some episodes from him coming very shortly. I imagine he is going to do the same thing as I did when I joined later on in the series, and that he will probably have an episode for every 2 episodes that me, Beardy, and N9 do, because at the beginning of a save, you just can't get out rockets fast enough. I am now at a point in this save where I can roll out rockets and build them in about 30 days. I have 2 build queues, so that's pretty much 2 launches a month if I'm really going for it. And that's with big rockets like this, like the Ariane, which is my biggest rocket at the moment. I have been able to fly 2 of these in 2 months, as well as Fish 4 and Sparrow. This has been only 2 months worth of content, really. The first launch was in the 3rd of November, and this launch is the 4th of January, 1968, I believe. But what we're going to be doing now, this is Pyramus IX, and we are going to be going back to the moon like we did at the beginning of this episode, and this time, I swear to God, we are going to land on the surface. If we don't do it now, well, I'm running out of time to complete the contract. I only have 90 days left on the contract before it fails. If I don't complete this, I will be able to get another Pyramus rocket out in time, because as I just mentioned, I am able to build these incredibly quickly now. But once again, using the Ariane 1, we had no failures. We were able to get this up to orbit, and we have now fired up that RZ-20 to send us over to the moon. Once again, this is a completely untargeted landing. We are going to be going for an impact, so hopefully the same thing doesn't happen again, where I smack into the side of the moon, because we run out of communications as we get there. We are a little ways off the moon this time, and rather than just using RCS, I do decide to fire up the RZ-20 again a couple of times. I do have quite a lot of fuel left over. Unfortunately though, this isn't fuel that I can use when I arrive at the moon, due to the fact that it was Hydrolox, and Hydrolox has this really nasty habit of boiling off before you get anywhere when you don't have any multi-layer insulation. But you can see we have got a direct impact course with the moon, and if this is successful, this will have been our 4th attempt at trying to soft land on the surface of the moon. First time we launched a vehicle on a chiton that N9 thankfully gave to us. The second time, well, the Ariane failed pretty much seconds after it first launched. Third time we saw earlier on in this episode. So yeah, that's how numbers work. I can count. I'm like the Count from Sesame Street. 1 attempt at trying to land on the moon. Anyway. Oh god, I've gone all over the place for this video, I do swear. It's been a while since I've recorded one of these voiceovers, but we do have communication back to Earth, and the Gamma 2 does fire up successfully, which means that I am more than confident that we are going to land on the surface and not explode. But as we get closer to the surface, you might be able to see a lot of lighter grey stuff suddenly appearing on the moon. Now, That is parallax. That is parallax, and that is not just parallax, that is so much parallax, it made my entire PC die. I was made aware by Beardy and N9 that there was a config that I needed to change for the surface of the moon, but I completely forgot about that before flying this. This is something that I do need to change, but you can see it's just lag. It's just pure lag, and then it got to the point where my recording software just stopped recording because my GPU couldn't handle it. So what I decided to do was take some pictures. Look! Picture evidence that we landed on the moon. You can see lunar landing uncrewed has been completed, and now you can see just how many parallax rocks were on there that was causing my entire game to die. It was really not the best of times.